it's now possible to make a higher quality butterfly sword than the butterfly swords that were actually used in China as combat-proven weapons. We have better materials, we have Western construction techniques, we have better equipment. So what's gone wrong? Why is it that most of the butterfly swords available to martial artists are far lower quality than basically the lowest quality stuff that got put out historically, stuff they had to be using? Well, most Chinese mass-produced butterfly swords are done in a run of about 500 or more swords, and the object is to maximize profit. It's usually easier to get more profit on lower-end swords because when you start talking about the higher-end swords, it's a sort of supply and demand thing. Martial artists can't really pay the full freight on something that a knife collector would pay much more for. And to get that high level of quality, you've got a lot of cost. So when you do 500 of a particular sword, you're not going to care a whole lot whether or not this sword is what a particular style of Wing Chun or Hung Gar or Shaolin needs. I mean, you're going to pick something you can make and make a profit on, and hopefully enough people who may not necessarily be happy with it but could get by with it will buy it. That's the way to maximize your profits. Model Design LLC makes Wing Chun butterfly sword designs for everything Wing Chun. What does everything Wing Chun do differently than the folks who turn out 500 of these? First of all, they do not make 500 of anything. They figure out what it is that a particular style of Wing Chun needs or wants. They design a sword for that purpose, and they produce a limited run. They don't produce the low-quality stuff. The guy in charge of everything Wing Chun, Aaron Cantrell, is a martial artist, and he uses it, and he talks to Sifus, and he gets feedback from Sifus. And part of the reason Model Design is in business is because I was dissatisfied with the quality of what was available. And I know that influences Aaron also. So everything Wing Chun's flagship line, which is their premier line, has three basic shapes. They've got their chopper, they've got their stabber, and they've got their hybrid. And they come in two types of steel, which are D2 and 440C. They're intelligently designed, they're constructed with quality, the craftsmanship is a lot higher than almost anything else you'll see on the market, and they're underpriced. What do I mean by underpriced? I work with U.S. custom knife makers. One of them is very good at making butterfly swords, and I said, how much would you charge for something like this, or how much is it worth? The first thing he said was, look, you're doing that on a limited production run basis, not a single model, so I'll take that into account. Minimum $900. You don't just draw a butterfly sword on a piece of paper and think you're going to end up with a usable weapon. It's got to be properly balanced. If it's supposed to flip, it's got to actually fit the hand. If it's supposed to trap, it has to actually be able to trap. If you've got a fuller, we definitely want a real fuller, not a decorative fuller. We want something that'll take the weight off and won't hurt the integrity. If there's a particular grind, we don't want a Mickey Mouse grind or a no grind. We want the grind we've asked for, and that takes a lot more work than taking the shortcut. Balancing these knives takes a lot of skill. Balancing a new design. There we go. So that involves figuring out what the correct thickness of the steel is, both for purposes of being able to survive however you want to use the weapon, but also for purposes of achieving the correct balance point. And some of the methods that we use are the distal taper and the profile taper, and we have to take into account the impact of the grind and the fuller. You also have to know what kind of tang it is, because that affects weight. There's just plain a lot going on, and that includes figuring out how hard, what kind of heat treatment is appropriate for your butterfly sword. take a look at that. This is the thicker Chinese El Cheapo, and the balance point is way too far forward. I'd like to say a few things about the construction methods that we can use today. As you'll recall, the traditional butterfly sword was hidden tang with an external peening. When we use a hidden tang and peen at Model Design LLC, it's recessed. Whereas this is brand X. Not only do you have a nut, but it's got sharp corners and the screw thread sticks out past the nut, so I'm sure it's going to be a real joy to use. If you'll take a look at this three-dimensional D-guard, which is well designed, structurally strong, it's actually a higher quality D-guard than on this antique, which doesn't have the curves and therefore has more weight for amounts of support. If you compare it to brand X, there is no comparison. If you take a look at the design of this D-guard, rounded with basically a straight run, rounded on the end. This rounding actually was a result of my studying some photographs of Ip Man's knife. We also use full tang, a Western technique, and instead of having to peen, we can weld with an argon welder. Welding is better than pinning. It's better than peening. The people who do this welding know what they're doing. It's not the El Cheapo. Let's talk about fit and finish. You saw that there was some empty space here, and that would have probably been there originally, which is too bad. I would have hoped for better construction quality for a militia weapon. We tend to like slotting, and our slotting is exceptionally good. So let's talk appearance, finish. We've already discussed the difference between a overseas mirror finish and the US mirror finish, and we've discussed the difference between a machine polishing a sword and individuals polishing a sword, and the importance of someone's work ethic when deciding whether or not they need to repeat polishing steps. Let's talk about some of the castings. When you hot drop forge or cast a D-guard, there's going to be a certain amount of pitting. You can either make the casting oversize and grind down and eliminate most of the problems. Some of the D-guards will still be rejected, or you can make the mold or the die so that whatever product comes out is going to be exactly the right size, and that percentage which comes out with pitting you're either going to have to scrap or you'll send it on. When you talk about an unscrupulous manufacturer, they're probably going to go for whatever it is that's cheapest, which means that they will use a cast D-guard with the cast pretty close to the final size, and instead of scrapping those D-guards that have so much pitting it would irritate a client, they just use it anyway. This is one of those mass-produced Chinese swords, and I just got it today, and I bought it from a perfectly reputable vendor. And I know if I picked up the phone and called them and said it was a piece of crap, I want you to take it back, they would, because I've dealt with them before. This vendor was in the UK and felt free to ignore me. This vendor is in the US and has never ignored me in the past. So it's sort of my general rule that if I don't have confidence in my seller, I'm not going to do business with them. And it takes a lot for me to be confident in an overseas seller of online martial arts weapons. The time to consider how you're going to get service if there's a problem is before you buy the weapon. And I actually do pay a premium to deal with vendors who have proven that they care about service. It's been a tough slog, and I thank you very much for sticking with this video to the end. I hope you know more about Chinese butterfly swords and that you can make a more informed purchase decision.